we think of emotional intimacy and physical intimacy as just being these twin flames. Like we can't have one without the other. We need both in relationships. And what a lot of people will tell us is, we've been together for so long. And at this point in time, like we kind of feel more like roommates rather than romantic partners. We feel like we're ships passing in the night. We just feel very disconnected from each other. And if you're feeling disconnected from your partner, it's really hard to get wildly hot and horny for having sex with them, right? So we wanted to help couples figure out how to reconnect because sex is not just something that we do in the bedroom with the doors locked and the lights off at the end of the night. Like the way that we feel close or disconnected from each other all throughout the day, like that affects our desire to be intimate with each other. So this conversation is all about like increasing that emotional intimacy so that physical intimacy doesn't feel like it's coming out of nowhere.
Welcome my guests, Vanessa and Xander Marin. They are a married couple here to help you keep the spark alive in your long-term relationship. Vanessa's a licensed psychotherapist with 20 years of experience in the sex therapy field. Xander's a regular dude who gets to talk about sex with his wife all day long. Together, they share totally doable sex tips, relatable relationship advice, and honest and sometimes hilarious stories about what really happens behind closed doors. Their mission is to take the intimidation out of getting intimate, and they are the authors of the New York Times bestselling book, Sex Talks, the 5 conversations that will transform your love life. All right, welcome to another episode on Passion, Love, Pursuit podcast. I am so happy to bring on the dynamic duo, Vanessa and Xander Marin. And I was telling them before I press record, this is one of my most favorite topics to have on the podcast. I know it's widely popular for a reason because I think it's one of the things that people struggle the most is in relationship is connection, intimacy, and keeping the spark alive. So I think that's why it's so popular because it's one of those topics that people want to learn more about, but they don't know who to ask. They don't know where to go. And like, it's kind of like this thing that maybe you'll talk to your girlfriends about, but it's way different when you hear from a sex therapist of really how to go deep into this conversation of how to actually improve the spark in our relationship. So Vanessa and Xander, I'm so happy to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We're really excited to be here.
Well, let's first start off with actually, Vanessa, how did you get the interest to become a sex therapist? I know you've been doing it for quite a while now. And then Xander jumped on board and now you both help others to really bring the spark back into relationships. But what interests you to even jump into this field?
So I wrote a book with Xander called Sex Talks. And the reason that I am in this field is because of my parents' attempt at giving me the sex talk. So like so many people, it was incredibly uncomfortable and awkward. And I had no idea at the time that sex therapy was a career, but I do remember just being very struck by my parents' discomfort and wondering like, why is this so awkward? I want to be able to talk about sex. I have questions. I have things that I'm hearing about, and I want to be able to talk about it. And as I got older and started becoming sexually active myself, I started realizing the impacts that not talking about sex were having on my own sex life. So that idea just stuck in the back of my head, and I kept coming back to it until I eventually realized, you know what? I think I can make a career out of this. I think this is what I want my life's work, my mission to be, is to help people get comfortable talking about sex. So I started down that path. I studied human sexuality. I went to grad school and became a licensed psychotherapist. started off seeing people in a traditional psychotherapy setting, working one on one. And my practice filled up very quickly. I was going over the same information over and over again. And so I quickly started thinking, how can I work with more people? And so I started creating online guides and courses of just taking all of my tips and techniques and knowledge and putting it together into these courses. And that was the point where Xander joined to help out with the operations. The
Yeah.
business started to take off. I needed help. So he started behind the scenes. And we did that for several years. And I just had this nagging feeling. I'm like, this is all about communication. I keep coming back to that idea of talking about sex. And I think there's something here about Xander and I talking about our own sex life, our own relationships together. I thought this was a great idea. Xander, however,
Yeah, I was
was
going
not
to
on
say.
board.
It took a little while to convince me, and so for me, I met Vanessa when she was still in training, and I had my own career. I never would have guessed that I would have been here. Um, but I started getting burnt out on my own career. I was in the consulting world, I was in tech, and I was taking some time off and seeing Vanessa's business growing. And so I started helping out with a couple projects here or there. And when she was asking me to get more involved, kind of in front of the camera, I was like, well, who wants to hear from me? Like, I've seen you go through all these years of school, of training, of licensing, of building a practice, of building all these online courses. Like, you have all this experience, and I don't have any. I like, what am I going to say? And Vanessa was like, well, but that's the thing. Like, people want to hear from a regular person that
Yeah.
doesn't have all the training. Like, how does an everyday husband, partner, guy do this stuff? Like, how do we do this stuff in our relationship? So I slowly started getting my toes wet, and Vanessa would share all the positive feedback we would get, and I started feeling better about myself and about kind of this approach of like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, it actually, us going first, leading with vulnerability, really helps open the door for other people to be like, oh, if they can do that, maybe I can try doing that too.
Yeah.
So now we have this
That's
business
great.
together where we really specialize in helping couples keep the spark alive in long term relationships and help it burn brighter than it ever has
Mhm.
before. So it feels really exciting to get to work on this together, to have the impact that we're having together, and to keep helping people talk about this very important
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah, I love, I mean, I know that usually men are more private about it and not as vulnerable. So the fact that you like got your toes wet and then you noticed how people are responding to that. So I'm sure it helped like at least nudge you a little further into it. And now you two are soaring on the socials and everything and all that you share. So it's really remarkable. And I could tell you have a great connection. But let's get vulnerable. So you've been married for some time. So can you share what has been your experience in your marriage? Possibly like what has been your ups and downs? I assume you're human. You've had ups and downs. The spark
We
has not
have.
been as bright. So can you kind of be just share a little bit about your marriage and how that maybe has been something that you two had to work through, even though you're the sex therapist that knows about this stuff?
The first page of Sex Talks, the book literally starts off with us being in couples therapy
Yep.
and me having dragged Xander pretty unhappily into therapy. So we're pretty open about our story. And the interesting thing about our story is that it's actually not very interesting at all. It's very it's very common.
Yeah.
We met and we had this unbelievable chemistry. It was like hot and heavy right from the beginning and so easy, so effortless. And I think we both took it as this sign from the universe like, oh, this is my person. It flows so well between us. The sex is so great between us. And then we get a year or two into the relationship. We've moved in together. Life is starting to catch up and things are starting to slow down.
Not so hot and heavy anymore.
Not so hot and heavy.
Yeah.
We were having a lot less sex. The sex that we were having was feeling very predictable and routine. And we both experienced that fear that I think pretty much everybody who's ever been in a long-term relationship has experienced at one time or another. And that's why I say our story is like not remarkable, but it's that fear that comes up of like, what happened to us? What happened to this unbelievable chemistry we used to have? The sign from the universe. Like, what happened to us? And so it took us a long time to like figure out, yeah, what is it that's going on between us? And we realized we didn't have a ton of resources. Like,
No.
and even me studying to become a sex therapist, then I get this added layer of imposter syndrome of like, I'm wanting to help
Right.
couples get over this, but I'm struggling with it in my own relationship. So once we were able to like muck through that period in our relationship, I think it really created the inspiration and the motivation to create better resources to help other couples get through this.
Yeah, and I think what's so important, like you said, it's nothing special about your story because that's actually how common it is. And I think that's what people need to hear. And because I think, it's so funny when we're going through something, we're like, no one will understand. Nobody
Uh-huh.
has it like this. Like, I'm the only one, we always think, and
Yep.
we're ashamed of it per se. So I think it is important for everyone to hear how common it is, especially for how many people you've worked with, I assume.
Absolutely. I mean, it's yeah, and you make such a good point that we all have this tendency so easily to feel like we're alone, we're the only person going through it, and I think we do that in every aspect of our lives, but with
Yes.
sex, it can feel even more vulnerable because it feels like we can't talk about it with other people. I mean, I can't tell you how many messages we get from people that say, I can't even be honest with this about this with my closest friends. I'll go
Mm.
out to brunch with my girlfriends and I'm like, yeah, we're having sex all the time and it's super hot and I'm orgasming multiple times every night. So it's just we really have that feeling of being alone. So that's why it was so important for us to share our own story and help people realize like it's okay. It's actually way more normal to experience the spark fading out than it is to just have it burning brightly for all of eternity.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
taking that step of just being able to acknowledge that, oh, this isn't the way that it used to be, or this isn't going the way that I want it to go, is so important because that actually allows you to then take the next step, which is okay, like now we can be teammates in this rather than me just being stuck alone. Because that's what happened to me was, you know, like I in when we were struggling, I was like, well, I'm a man. I'm supposed to know what I'm doing when it comes to sex. I'm supposed to be running the show here. And yet I'm not. Like Vanessa is asking me like, why aren't we having as much sex as we used to? Why am I not wanting to have sex? And it was just this very confronting experience for me of like, do I continue on the way that I was sort of like conditioned to behave as a man and maybe like risk breaking up our relationship because I'm not willing to ask for help, I'm not willing to get introspective? Or is it, or do I want to stick it out and actually get a little help and get curious about what's actually going on? And I'm so happy that I made the choice to go that route, because it opened so many doors in
Of
terms of
course.
how close we are, what our sex life is like, what our whole career is like. It's been pretty incredible.
Yeah. And so, what would be from all the people you've worked with, what is some of the common blocks, if you want to say that, or the things that are dimming really the spark in the relationship? I mean, we all know stress is a huge one, but like, what would be some other ones? Because I know you mostly work with couples that have been in a long term relationship or married or live together. So, what would you say is the common thing you see with your clients that's
Yeah,
happening?
stress is a huge one. And I think most people really underestimate the power of stress. Stress is actually the number one sex drive killer. So that's a big one. But a lot of it is just general like busyness with life. All of us
Yeah.
have so much on our plate. Our to do list is a mile long, and it can feel so easy for our partner and our relationship and our sex life to drift to the bottom of that list. Kids can make it a lot harder as well. It really shifts the balance in your partnership when you bring a kid into the relationship. And even things like performance issues or
Hmm.
challenges in your sex life, if you can't talk about it, it makes the issue like feel bigger and bigger and scarier and
Hmm.
scarier. So very common, just like everyday things that we all
Yeah.
go through
Well,
can
that's
really
why
get in
this
the
is so
way.
common, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I know another thing you talk about in your book is we have basically two different sex drives, or
Mhm.
right, two separate sex drives. What are those two, and how will that help inform us on like really understanding ourselves more and our partner?
So, low sex drive is probably the biggest complaint that
Hmm.
we hear from people. I feel like I have no sex drive, low sex drive, and especially if you feel like your partner has a higher sex
Hmm.
drive. So, we share in Sex Talks this information about the two sex drive types, which most people do not realize these two types exist. And it's really game changing information, especially if you feel like you're somebody who has low sex drive. So these two types boil down to where we feel desire first. So we feel it in two places: our heads mentally, like the idea of sex sounds good to us, and we feel desire in our bodies, like our bodies physically start to prepare for sex. They
Hmm.
get, physically aroused. And so one type of sex drive is spontaneous sex drive. And this is actually the type that we see in TV and in the movies. So you'll see the character like just randomly, it feels like sex pops into their head and they want to go find their partner. It's just like out of nowhere type of feeling, like lightning strikes you in that moment. And so what's happening there is you're getting the mental desire first, and then the physical arousal is going to come later. But the second sex drive type is called responsive sex drive, and it's the exact opposite. You need to feel the desire in your body first before your head starts thinking, hey, this is fun. This sounds like a good idea. So, research has found that women tend to be more in the responsive camp. And one of the classic ways of knowing if you might be a responsive type is if you've ever been in the middle of sex or even at the end of sex and found yourself thinking, this is really fun. Why don't I seem to want this more often? That is a classic
That's
responsive
interesting.
type. So it's not that anything's wrong with you. It's not that you're broken. It's just that your desire shows up in a different way. So once we have that information and we have that normalizing of like, oh, I'm not this horrible person with no sex drive, then we can start approaching our sex life in a different way with respect for our type and what it needs to get turned on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the real problem is that the way that sex drive is portrayed, like in the media, in books, in movies, the way that we see it our entire lives is we see spontaneous sex drive. Like two
Mm.
people just look at each other and it's on. And so we've set our bar for like what good sex drive is as spontaneous. But the reality is that like probably at least like half of people aren't that sex drive type, and so we're measuring the wrong thing. It's not just a matter of, oh, how often do you randomly think of sex, and that indicates like whether you have a high or low sex
Mm-hmm.
drive. It
Mhm.
has so much more to do with just like, are you putting yourself in a position to be able to feel that drive for sex, that desire for sex?
Yeah, absolutely. And how much does, because, especially as we get older, hormones play a big part. So, how much would you say, low testosterone play a part in the low sex drive? Like, is that something you address with your clients? Because I would think that is a big component, but is it as much as I think?
Hormones are the first place that people think of when they think of
Yeah.
low sex drive.
We like to be able to quantify things, so it's easy to be like,
Yeah.
oh, show us the number.
Yeah. Oh, it's just low testosterone. And so, hormones do play a role in sex drive. Absolutely. But they play a much smaller role than
Mm.
most people realize. So it's tempting to want to look at the hormones because we feel like, oh, well, I'll just take more testosterone and then that solves it. But there are so many other aspects that factor into sex drive and that can be much more complex than that. So it actually is a much smaller piece of the puzzle than most people realize.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way larger slice of the pie, so to speak, is has to do with your emotional well-being. like in general, like how emotionally connected are you and your partner? How is your personal well-being? And like, are you overly stressed? Like, are you, like, are you getting physical activity? All the things that
Yeah.
contribute to just your general well-being contribute to your sex drive. Because, the reality is, if you think back to kind of like, you know, back in the ice age or something like that, humans are, it's, you're like hunting and gathering and all that stuff. And like, when you are super stressed, like a woolly mammoth is chasing you, like,
Hmm.
you're not going to have an erection. You're not going to be wanting to have sex, right? So like, when we are in fight or flight mode, we are definitely not ever thinking about sex. Doesn't matter what our hormone levels are
Yeah.
at all. And I think what we often, fail to realize is that, when we are, when our well-being is not very high, we are often kind of in a low level of fight or flight mode, and that really
Absolutely.
impacts us.
It's such a good thing to bring up because that goes, as you were saying, stress. And if our body is like, if we're not doing things to keep our health at optimal levels, if you want to say stress is compacting at us or whatnot, of course, like you just said, it makes sense that that plays a big, big role on opposed to just testosterone. So it makes so much sense for sure. So let's go into, since you mentioned like the conversation, right? Being able to talk about it and moving into your book, Sex Talks. I know First Happier book is about you. And so what would be some of the things addressed in that section that we should be starting to think about?
Yeah, so we set the book up this way because we want people to be able to have a little bit of an exploration of their own relationship with sex. I think when we're in long term relationships, we think of our sex life as something that exists between the two of us,
Mm-hmm.
which of course it does. And we each have our own individual relationships with sex. And so the more we understand about ourselves, the better we can come into these relationships. So, for example, if you've ever had your partner ask you, like, well, what do you want in bed tonight? And you're like, I don't know. What are the options? Like, that's a good sign that you can learn a little bit more about your own relationship with sex. So, in that first section, we cover things like understanding your sex drive type and what you need to get turned on. We talk about your boundaries, like understanding what feels good for you, what feels off limits, what's on the table for you. We talk about a sense of safety as well, and unpacking your own sexual baggage. Like, what is it that you were taught about sex? What are the limiting beliefs that might be getting in your way?
Hmm. So good. And what would you say if a couple does have two different types of sex drive, like one maybe is more like they like it more sensual and the other one likes it more wild and kinky or whatever it may be, like how do you come together in that? I know
Yeah.
this probably goes into your book is starting the 5 conversations, but if you could kind of maybe just address that, I'm just out of curiosity, like, because I think that might be, I mean, is that a big thing you come across, the different sex drives?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's really important to normalize like you and your partner are different people and you're going to have different everything when it comes to sex, like different times that you're interested in being intimate, different types of sex that you're wanting to have in a
Mm-hmm.
specific moment. So I think sometimes we think about sexual compatibility and we feel like, oh, I'm supposed to want exactly what my partner wants at the exact time my partner wants. And that's just not realistic. So we really like to normalize, like, if you feel like you're on different pages about things with your sex life, like, welcome to being in a relationship, like, that's
Yeah.
normal. So, then we boil down into like, well, what are the specific differences? And of course, there are going to be extreme cases where maybe it feels like, yeah, what we want and what we like is just too different for this to work. But for the majority of cases, when we are able to talk about our desires and curiosities openly, there's actually a lot more space to like explore those types of things. So it might be like a great example is we'll tell, some people will tell us, well, I love morning sex, but my partner loves evening sex. Like, okay, that's okay. That's normal to have different preferences. So maybe you guys both have some morning sex, you both have some evening sex,
Yeah.
you have some afternoon sex too. you know?
Yeah. Yeah, compromise. So I know you talk about some of the golden rules before starting the conversation with your partner, because I imagine some people that are listening to this episode are listening because they're curious and they want to improve this in their relationship, but maybe their partner is not listening. I'm sure that's the case for a lot.
Mhm.
So, what would be some of the golden rules before starting the conversation with your partner to address some of these things that will go into the conversations?
Yeah, it's very common for couples to be on different pages. I mean, that's a part of our story too.
Hmm.
Like, I wanted to go to therapy and start working on our sex life, and Xander did not. So, we really designed sex talks to work, even if a couple is not reading it together, or there's one partner who's feeling a lot more hesitant to start having these kinds of conversations. So, that's definitely, we'll guide you guys through that as well. But with the golden rules of communication, the cool thing about this, and we're getting a lot of feedback from people about this, is that these rules really apply to any communication. Like, you can talk about your relationship in general with your partner, but these can be used in your relationship with your mom or with your best friend or even at work.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
there's, once you get comfortable talking about sex, it's like you can talk about anything. Your
Yeah.
communication skills will really up level. So, we have a couple of the golden rules that are our favorites. One is checking your stories with each other. So it's really easy for us to start creating meaning in our heads about what our partner's words or actions meant. And once we create a story, we can kind of cling to that story quite a bit. And it can be hard for us to let go of that story. So this is a technique that Xander and I use in our relationship almost every day, is like bringing those stories out into the light of day and checking them with each other. So, an example that comes up for us all the time is like, we'll start having a conversation and one of us might say, like, okay, I'm creating this story in my head that you're a little bit upset with me right now. So it works really well because it gives that person the chance to express, like, this is what's coming up for me, and this is the fear that I'm having, the worry that I'm having. But it also gives your partner a chance to check in with the story and tell you, like, is that accurate or not? So when one of us says that, like, at least half of the time the other partner's like, oh, interesting, like, I'm actually not upset at all. So it just like gives you that opportunity to reset a conversation.
And then one of my favorites is to avoid using the words never and always when you're communicating, because they're very definitive words. And really, if Vanessa tells me, like, hey, you never take out the trash,
Right.
then the first thing that comes to my mind is, well, let me think of the last time I did do that, so that I can defend myself. And really, all that serves to do is completely derail the conversation, because probably there's a request behind what she's saying. Maybe there's an emotion, a feeling behind that. But when you say, like, oh, you never do this or you always do this, you're just cueing your partner to kind of go into lawyer mode and go, like, well, hold on a
Yeah.
second, actually, we did this 2 weeks ago or whatever. And all of a sudden you're arguing over logistics instead of the actual feeling or emotion
Or
of what's really
conversation.
going on. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's so true. I love that. And so going into some of the 5 conversations you talked about in the book, can we walk through I don't know if we could get through all 5, but can we walk through some of the steps?
Yeah, so the first conversation is what we call acknowledgement. Like, sex is a thing and we have it. So this conversation is all about just getting comfortable with sex as a topic of conversation, because we've found that the vast majority of couples in long-term relationships have either never talked really openly about sex or have only talked about sex in the context of an argument or had a big fight about it. And we know that a lot of people picking up this book are going to feel uncomfortable, anxious, nervous about talking about sex. So we wanted to really ease people in. So the conversations are laid out in a really specific order to
Mm.
do that. So this conversation is all about just getting comfortable, like saying the words, talking about it. We're not trying to problem solve. We're not giving any feedback. We're not making any requests. We're not even using it to initiate sex. We're literally just getting comfortable with it. So one of our favorite, like, very practical exercises from this conversation, and this is something that people can do after listening to the episode, is take a little bit of time to think about one of your favorite sexual memories with your partner and then share that with them today. So you can do it face to face if you want to. You can do it over text if you're feeling shy or embarrassed. But basically, what you want to say is just the memory itself. So you can say something like, you know what just popped into my head pretty randomly today? Like, I was thinking about that anniversary trip that we went on to Mexico, and we were staying at that hotel and how we stayed up pretty late that night. It just popped into my head. It was a really fun memory to think about, and I just figured I'd share it with you again. So, what you're doing here is you're starting to lay the foundation of talking about sex in a positive and healthy way and helping your partner realize, like, oh, this can be a safe and fun and exciting topic to talk about.
Yeah, so like you're showing your partner not only is this a safe and fun topic to talk about, you're kind of you're detaching the association that many of us have of, well, sex is an awkward conversation, or at worst, it's a dangerous conversation, because many of us have had the experience, maybe in a past relationship or even in your current relationship, where you don't really talk about sex very much until there's a big problem and everything comes boiling over and it's a big fight. And so many of us just think, okay, well, I want to do it, but I don't want to talk about it. And so this is just trying to show you it is totally safe, totally normal to talk about. In fact, we can actually end up feeling really connected. So it's a topic that is exciting to talk about.
Yeah. And then the next one is connection. Am I right?
Yeah, so that one is all about what do we need to feel close to each other.
Mm.
So we think of emotional intimacy and physical intimacy as just being these twin flames. Like, we can't have one without the other. We need both in relationships. And what a lot of people will tell us is, we've been together for so long. And at this point in time, like, we kind of feel more like roommates rather than romantic partners. We feel like we're ships passing in the night. We just feel very disconnected from each other. And if you're feeling disconnected from your partner, it's really hard to get wildly hot and horny for having sex with them, right? So we wanted to help couples figure out how to reconnect,
Mhm.
because sex is not just something that we do in the bedroom with the doors locked and the lights off at the end of the night. Like, the way that we feel close or disconnected from each other all throughout the day, like, that affects our desire to be intimate with each other. So this conversation is all about, like, increasing that emotional intimacy so that physical intimacy doesn't feel like it's coming out of nowhere.
Right. And I think that's so important. So, what would be some ways that could help us connect more throughout the day or create that connection? Because again, as we were talking about, like, we have a list of all our to-dos, all our stresses, we have
Uh-huh.
the kids and all these things. So, how would you suggest people could start to find more connection in their days to help that?
One of the best and easiest ones is gratitude. So, research has found that gratitude is actually the number one predictor of marital satisfaction. Like, it's that powerful. And the
Mm,
great thing about gratitude is it's free, it's very easy to do, and it takes very little time to do. So, just making that effort to, like, pay more attention to your partner and to see the things that they're doing throughout the day and show them your appreciation. So, like, I saw that you took the trash out. I saw that you unloaded the dishwasher. Hey, I really appreciate that you cooked dinner tonight. Just taking those few seconds to call things out like that, it makes a shockingly big difference for you to, like, make the effort to notice those things, because our brains are actually much more wired to look for the things that are wrong and annoying
yes.
and we don't like.
Yeah.
And it has a shockingly huge impact on your partner to, like, actually feel seen by you and to feel appreciated.
Yeah, I think it's so easy in marriage or in a long-term relationship to just kind of start to take your partner for granted, in terms of like, okay, these are some tasks that they do, these are the tasks that I do. You kind of start to look at it like almost this transactional thing. Like, they do
Right.
that, I do this, and then everything works. But the reality is that a relationship, a marriage, it's not a transactional thing. Like, we got into it because we love each other, because we want to be a team. We want to be in this together. And so it's so nice to be able to just appreciate our partners for what they do, rather than thinking, oh well, that they do that task all the time, I shouldn't even need to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Right? But it's so easy to fall into that trap. But yeah, try to think, it's your teammate instead. Like, if you're playing sports and your teammate does a good job with something, like, you give them praise, right? You don't see
Yeah.
winning sports teams like not giving each other high five, right?
Or the slap on
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
butt.
Yeah. No, it's so good. It's so important. And I think that like anybody listening right now could reflect on like, are you doing that? It's really
Mhm.
as simple as that. Like, are you actually all the things you name, just those little things being thankful for, not just like expected. And I love
Mhm.
that. I think it was written in the book, or I heard this in an interview. You said, Vanessa, that think of your relationship like a fire, and you have to keep throwing in the logs to keep the fire still burning. And I love that
Mhm.
analogy, because that's really what it is.
Yeah.
To keep, like, you need to contribute, you need to water the plants, like,
Yeah.
so
We use the language of like, you have to identify your logs. What are your
Mhm.
logs? And so throughout the book, it's kind of referencing figuring out what are the things that are most powerful for you. We're all unique. We all like different things. And so identifying like, oh yeah, that's the stuff that has the biggest impact for me. We're all about the most bang for your buck.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
identifying those things that are particularly powerful for you.
Yeah, I mean, we love that metaphor, that analogy so much, because I think so many of us get tripped up by that, because we're like, okay, when our relationship starts, it's like you throw a bunch of lighter fluid on the logs, and it
So
goes
true.
up in flames, and it's just like, oh my God, this fire is so hot and so bright, it's never gonna go out. And it's like when you start a bonfire, yeah, it goes for a long time, but then it slowly, slowly does start to
So
go
true.
out, unless you put more logs on it. But like, we're so kind of obsessed with the beginning of that analogy, we forget about the other part, which is you got to feed the fire, otherwise it goes out. But the reality is, you can resurrect that fire whenever you want. You just got to throw some logs on it. So yeah, that conversation too is all about discovering your logs.
What I appreciate so much, of course, and your mission is giving couples the hope that just because maybe the sex isn't what it used to be, the spark is kind of dim right now, that there is potential to reignite the flame and the passion in your relationship. So I think that's what's so beautiful is what you're doing. Sorry, my
No,
computer.
no worries.
So it's amazing. It gives a lot of couples, I'm sure, hope. And of course, I think everybody would want to grab the book after this, or at least learn more about your courses to dive deeper, because I know, like, you know, one thing I am wondering, which will go more into your book. Well, let me first ask this question. What are some of the things that chip away connection? Because I think that's also very important for people to really understand too.
I think it's when we stop paying attention to each other. We start really taking each other for granted and just sort of assume that our partner should be doing those things. Like Xander was talking about, we start to take this
Mhm.
transactional view of the relationship, like, oh, well, those are just your things. You should be doing them. But I really think so much of attraction and connection is all about paying attention, like really
Mhm.
seeing our partners. And so it's when we've stopped making that effort, when we're so distracted by our phones or by our own to-do list, that we're not making that effort to like just see our partner.
Yeah, I think that that's so important, because the reality is, as time goes by in a relationship, we all grow and change. And if we're so stuck in the like, oh, well, I know who my partner is, like, I don't really need to pay attention because, whatever, already know everything there is to know about them, you're missing out on this huge opportunity to get to know who your partner is now, or who they are becoming. Like
Mhm.
for Vanessa and me, like, I feel like I've been at least 3 or 4 different people through the course of our
Sure.
relationship, and like, it has grown and
We call
evolved.
him Xander 4.0.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
but no, we've both grown and evolved
Mhm.
so much, and there were definitely times in the relationship where I wasn't really open to looking at that, and then it was just like, oh God, like, it feels like she's changing, and she's not the way that she used to be. instead of being like, oh, like who is this person now, and can I get to know them and love them even more?
Yeah. And what I forgot where my brain was going. Oh yeah, what would you say is the common problem you see when you start working with somebody like one-on-one couples? What as you're working with them? Because as usually therapy, it kind of gets worse before it gets better sometimes, because you're like surfacing all these things, you're finally talking about it, especially with one another. So what would you say is like the common struggle couples have, if there's a commonality?
The most common one we see is just this feeling of the spark having gone out. Like, we're just not enjoying sex anymore. We're not having very much of it. The sex that we're having is not feeling very pleasurable. Sometimes couples will say it feels like there are wildly mismatched sex drives, like we mentioned earlier. But that central idea that comes up over and over again is like, shouldn't there be more to it than this? Like, what happened to the two of us?
Yeah. And what would you say is, as far as, especially for couples that have kids, what would you say? Do you suggest to the people you work with, like, have a date night once a week, or do you have a certain suggestion of that quality time with one another and scheduling it? And some, I know a lot of people that I've interviewed, they always say schedule sex, like schedule the, like, I don't know how you feel
Uh-huh.
about that.
Well, so date night, we definitely do think that it's important for couples to have quality time together. And especially once you become parents, of course, there are seasons of life and relationship and parenting in particular where it feels so much harder to make the time for that. But it is really important to have some space in your life that's just for your relationship, just for the two of you. So I think if you are going through a challenging season, we can really reconceptualize what date night can be. Maybe it's like all we have the time and energy for is the kids go to sleep and we have that 20 minutes where we can pour a glass of wine and just like relax in bed together. That can be a date night. Like anything can be a date night. So we definitely do recommend that. Now, when it comes to scheduling sex, this is always such an interesting topic to talk about because I think the average person feels very resistant to the idea
Right.
of scheduling sex. Like it feels like, oh God, things are really bad if we have to schedule it. And, you see like TV sitcoms where it's like there's this super type A controlling mom who's got the family calendar and the color coded like purple dots are sex night kind of thing. So we see it being made fun of in pop culture. But we think that scheduling sex is a really great idea for a lot of couples. And we like to
Mm,
start off the conversation by kind of turning the whole idea on its head. So couples will always tell us, okay, but at the beginning of our relationship, like it was just so easy and it was so effortless.
Yeah,
And
we
we,
never had to schedule
yeah.
sex.
So
right.
this
Of
is what
course.
we like to say
But
though.
did
Okay.
you really?
Like if you wanted to see your partner when you were dating them, what did you
Mm,
do? You scheduled a date, right? And once you started being intimate with your partner, once you started having sex, there was a pretty good idea that on those scheduled dates, you were going to be having sex with them. So
yeah.
you've been scheduling sex from the very beginning of your relationship. You just looked at it in a different way. I think back then we look at it as, hey, I'm a busy person with a life. My partner's a busy person with a life. If we want to spend time together, we have to be intentional about when can we do that. I mean, nobody sits around saying, oh, well, we're dating, but like, if it's meant to happen, it'll just happen
Yeah,
spontaneously.
we'll
It's
run
like,
into each other on the street, like
yeah.
at the restaurant that we're
Yeah.
meant to have a date at. Like,
Yeah.
okay, cool. Maybe you'll have one date a year in
Yep.
that case.
Yep.
So, back in the beginning of our relationship, it's like we had a really positive view of scheduling things. It was like, yeah, I'm doing this because I want to see you and you are worth me carving some time out in my schedule. And we would look forward to that date and anticipate it, get ourselves so excited and worked up about it. So it's not that relationships shift from being effortless and spontaneous in the beginning and now they're so hard and you have to do all the scheduling, when you're into it. It's like we can have that same sort of attitude about scheduling time with our partner that we did in the beginning of the relationship.
Yeah, I think what tends to change in a long term relationship is we forget about the excitement about how to get ourselves excited
Yeah.
for those scheduled times, for whether it's a date night or just scheduled sex, because like Vanessa was saying, in the early stages, like you're like, oh yeah, I'm going out on a date tonight. You're thinking about it all day long. You're spending
Getting
time thinking of
ready.
what you're getting ready, go to the gym, whatever it is. Like you're getting pumped up. You're getting pumped up to see them. You're getting pumped up to have sex with them. Like, and so yeah, it's like, can we bring that same energy back to it now? And so it's less about like, oh God, okay, well, what time is it going to be? But actually like, oh, okay, today is, today we're going to have sex. Like, what can I do to get myself excited throughout the day?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I know there's 5 conversations in your sex talk book, but I'm curious. I do want everybody to grab the book. I have the book. I want to dig into it completely. But if somebody is wanting to, or let me ask you, would you say the book is enough for people to actually be able to bring the spark back in their relationship, or do you feel possibly maybe one of your courses to go along with it, or therapy? Like, when do you start to suggest that? Because I know that you know, as self-help books, I've read thousands of, or I feel like I haven't read literally 1,000, but I feel like I've read a lot. And it's like, we could really go down the rabbit hole, like reading all these things, but then how do we actually take action on all these things we have read? So
Oh yeah, we're big on helping people take action. Like we don't want you just to read the book and it
yeah,
ends there and you never
yeah,
actually have any of the conversations. So the book is a great starting point for any couple. Like we really believe that every couple will benefit from having these 5 conversations, whether you're in a tough place in your relationship right now or maybe you're in a pretty good place
Yeah.
and you're just kind of curious about how could it be even better? So the book is all about communicating about your sex life and developing a better understanding of yourself and each other. And then the guides and courses that we have tend to get more into the technique behind sex. So that's not something that we cover in Sex Talks, but our most popular guides, one of them is called our Ultimate Foreplay Guides. So we love getting into the nitty gritty of like exactly how to have sex. Like we all want to be great at sex, right? But where did we ever learn? Like we feel like we're supposed to be so good at it without ever having gotten any
Mhm.
actual techniques or resources or new ideas. So we have our ultimate foreplay guides that walk you through using your hands and mouths on each other. And we also have kind of like the companion guide to that is called Next Level Intercourse.
mm,
So it's very detailed and specific about intercourse in particular. So like positions, timing, making sure that everybody is having a good time and having an orgasm, all kinds of fun stuff. And then we also have our other most popular things are our challenges. We have a connection challenge. So if you are struggling with emotional intimacy and want even more resources than is covered in Sex Talks, and we have a sex challenge, which is all about different ways to like keep it spicy
Mhm.
and feeling exciting.
and the challenges are something that, like, on your website you'd get as, like, start it when you want to start it, or is this something you do on your socials and a start date and
Yeah,
join,
no,
like
it's you can get it at our website. We're at
okay.
vmtherapy.com. It's my initials vmtherapy.com. There's a courses tab that has all the information there, but with the challenges you sign up whenever you want and you get emails every single day with like what the daily challenges
Oh,
are. So it's
very
super
nice.
fun. It's like very playful. It's a great anniversary gift. And it's just, yeah, regardless of where your relationship is at, it's such a playful way to reprioritize each other.
Yeah,
And
well, yeah, whether it's reprioritizing sex or intimacy. And yeah, I think the really fun thing about the sex challenge is a lot of people are like, oh, well, but like intercourse for how many days?
yeah.
And it's actually, it's all about all the possible sex options that there are. Intercourse is only a small part of it. So it's really trying to kind of open your eyes to the full range of possibilities and, really discovering like what stuff is really exciting to each of you.
That's so great. You two must have so much fun creating all the content you do on your socials and everything. Cause it seems, I mean, it's work, I know partly, but I'm sure it seems like you have so much joy in creating this. I think obviously because you're genuinely helping a lot of people that are following you and wanting to learn more of this. So it's really awesome to see you two work together.
Thank
it's
you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
there's
we
not that
love
many.
hearing. Yeah. We just love hearing back from our community. We get so many stories of people
Mhm.
saying, it's just transformed our relationship. We're having so much more fun with each other. We feel more connected than we've ever been before. And every single one of those messages just gets us so motivated and fired up. And then also us having experienced the impact on our own relationship too.
Absolutely.
Like that keeps us motivated to do this. But we just have this really deep belief that everybody deserves really deep love and epic sex. So
Yeah.
we want to help everybody get there.
So remarkable. Is there anything else that I'm missing that you would want to include as helping somebody reignite the passion and spark in their relationship? Is there anything kind of to add that we haven't touched on yet?
Oh, there's so many things.
I
I
mean,
mean, we
there's
could
so
be
many.
we could be here for hours and
Yeah,
hours. But yeah, I mean, definitely check out Sex Talks. It's such a great starting point. And you can also find us on Instagram at Vanessa and Xander. It's Xander with an X. We love showing up there and answering questions and making fools out of ourselves. So we really try to just take all of the taboo away from sex and help people have a lot more fun with it.
Yeah, and if you do pick up the book, we'll give you a free workbook to go along with it. You can get that at sextalksbook.com. We also have all the links to all the retailers there, but
great.
it's everywhere.
Great. Yeah, I'll link that all in the show notes. Okay, so to ask you both my last question that I ask all my guests, and you both can answer it if you want, or if one of you wanted, whichever. So if you were to share a piece of wisdom, a life lesson that you've just learned along your journey that you feel everybody needs to hear right now, what would that piece of wisdom be?
I mean, I think we've got to keep it in the sex talks realm of, talking about sex. We really believe is the key to the intimacy and the closeness and the connection that we are all so deeply craving.
Yeah, and I think I would just say, like, question all the assumptions that you think you have about yourself, about relationships, about your sex life. We are all conditioned and, socialized with all of these negative messages when it comes to sex, or some misleading messages. And so it's so easy for us to be operating under all of those. But I just would encourage anybody to just question some of those, try
Check
something
your
new,
stories.
check your
Yeah.
stories. Yeah, try reading the book, see what you think. Try some of the exercises. I think you'll be surprised at how it feels to do something a little different.
Yeah. So good. So good. I appreciate you both. This has been such an honor. And truly, I think that this could be a game changer for a lot of people as I'm diving into it still myself, because I think we all have more to learn. So, and like you said, it doesn't matter if you're either maybe not in like having like problems in your relationship. It could be just you want something better, So I think this book is really truly for any couple. So thank you
Yes,
so much,
thank
Vanessa and
you.
Xander. I appreciate you both.
Thanks
Yeah,
for having
thanks.
us.
So welcome.